Hi everyone, and welcome back to Blood, Guts, and Social Commentary. Today we're going to be doing something a little different on Why Is This a Thing? We're going to be looking at two films, both by Phil Stevens. Before I get into Flowers and Lung 2, I just want to give a brief summary of both of them, because the films, both coming from the same director, and the overall feel of them I feel is very interconnected and can be addressed together. Flowers is a 2015 film. It is described as an abstract, surreal film centering around 6 dead women waking up in the crawl space below their killer's house. Lung 2 was made in the following year, 2016, and it's described as a nameless man wanders the city, littered with necrotic artifacts and a trail of corpses. Are his grotesque hallucinations clues to a violent past, or are they premonitions? The important thing to note about both of these films is that they are silent. And as I addressed in the Phantom of the Opera episode, silent doesn't mean silent completely, silent as in devoid of dialogue. There is music, there is sound effects that all build atmosphere around both of these films. In Lung 2, there is some talking, but it's heavily distorted to the point where you really can't understand it. If you've seen Lucifer Valentine's Vomit Core trilogy, that's kind of the voice manipulation is kind of what we're looking at here. It's just not quite as demonic sounding. It has a more musical quality to the distortion than what Lucifer Valentine did, I guess would be the best way to put that. I did reach out to the director and ask specifically why he didn't choose to use any dialogue. To paraphrase what he told me, he says his films just gradually got quieter. He made more dialogue-heavy films back in 2008. His film in 2009 had slightly less dialogue, and then he got very into illustration and painting, where he didn't really need to use dialogue to express what was going on. It was through movement, it was through color, it was through the action on the canvas, and not so much what people were saying. So his films kind of took on that air, and he felt it best represented what he wanted to do. This lack of dialogue and people flat out telling you what's going on feeds into the subtext of both Flowers and Lung 2. As was already established in the synopsis, Flowers is about 6 women waking up in a crawl space when they should be dead. Their bodies are reanimating. All 6 of these women are on the cast list only called Flower 1, Flower 2, etc., in the order in which they woke up. This deals with not only them waking up, but them flashing back and grappling with whatever happened to kill them. While their killer is walking around the house and one of them does see him kill somebody else, we don't focus heavily on the killer's motives. We focus more on these women and not only why they're waking up, but what happened to put them there in the first place? What series of events led to them being killed? We see this exact same character naming principle in Lung 2. The main character's name is completely unknown. There's a person referred to as psychologist, which you gather from the fact that he's kind of interviewing people. It looks like a very psychologist setup, is how you deduce that. Everybody else is like woman 1, woman 2, nurse. Normally the way people would name extras is the way the main characters in this film are named. This loss of a name leads to a serious loss of their identity. This is very true in our culture. When something bad happens to somebody, they become what happened to them to other people. This is typically true in cases of murder where we remember the case more than we remember the victim's name. This is true, unfortunately, in rape cases where the person becomes either a rape victim or a rape survivor. This is also true with medical conditions. People that have been through severe illnesses or have had cancer or something like that get referred to as a cancer patient. They get referred to as having leukemia. They don't tend to get referred to by their name and by who they are. A slightly less drastic example of this is the massive feminist talking point around women losing their last names when they get married. They view it as the female losing her identity and becoming her husband's property is the argument there. While there are plenty of women that choose to hyphenate or don't take their husband's last name, it's still viewed as this colossal loss of identity. This loss of identity through losing one's name isn't a new idea. The Ayn Rand novel Anthem deals with this. Granted, this was an allegory for a communist society where everybody was referred to by numbers instead of an individualistic name. And we see this a lot in sci-fi as well, where they'll have robots that are referred to by numbers. The funny thing about it is, if you actually look at it, the combination of numbers you can have is way more unique than the combination of letters you can have. But that's kind of what we've gone to as a society. Most people get referred to by some kind of name instead of a batch of numbers. It gives us a sense of personality. It gives us a sense of identity. In the Netflix original movie, The Discovery, Isla talks about how if you don't grow into your name by a certain age, you just kind of awkwardly stick out. I don't feel like an Isla, but that's what I was called. So if you don't grow into your name by 4, you just kind of have this awkward name for the rest of your life. Where the lack of dialogue plays in is not only to not give you identifying features on these people, it's also to metaphorically and literally take their voices. Well, Phil explained he got into illustration and no longer felt the need to rely on dialogue. Having your characters remain nameless and remain autonomous, paired with them not speaking, or if they speak, it's incredibly distorted, again, pulls that sense of identity away from these people, because most of the people you will see in these films fit into 2 categories, either victim or killer. There's very little shade of gray in between. So the protagonist will become this mirror. The victim loses their identity and becomes the incident that happened to kill them. The killer loses their identity and becomes just this killer. Look at the way people look at Charles Manson. People know what he did more than the supposed backing and reasons why he did it. And I say supposedly because anything with Manson, I know you have to run through a crazy filter, so process that statement with a large detachment with reality. Another thing to note about both of these films, they both have a couple of scenes that revolve heavily around food. In Flowers, one of the girls, when she comes to, sees this feast and starts eating it, and bad things happen, but I'm not going to give away that plot point. In Lung 2, there is a scene where an unknown character walks into a home. He sees somebody sitting at a dinner table. Clearly they were eating and now they're dead. And when he goes to open the fridge, it's all filled with body parts. Once again, we're seeing that degradation of people down to simply a fleshy thing that something happened to. You can also use this as an argument for in Flowers, there's a point where somebody does reach inside of themselves and literally finds nothing. They're just kind of a hollowed out shell. This could also be viewed as an allegory for eating disorders. Whichever end of the spectrum it's on, if you're eating and empty, you become that disorder. If you eat too much, you become that disorder. Is people don't seem to identify the person behind it anymore. They view them as the anorexic, the bulimic, the compulsive overeater. Which, depending on the severity and extremity of the disorder, it can alter your body enough that the world around you sees that without you having to say it. If somebody was a victim of sexual assault, people on the street aren't going to know that. But if you were severely underweight or severely overweight, people on the street will notice that, and that will be their perception of you immediately. It's that notion taken to this very dark and extreme place, where it becomes a complete and utter loss of identity and you are really just a fleshy shell walking around. This concept is seen again in Lung 2. There is a point when the main character reaches into a refrigerator and he finds this amorphous blob. It's clearly of human tissue, but there's only really 2 parts of it that are clear what they once were. And that is a section of the female anatomy and a section of the male anatomy. He begins to touch the part of the female anatomy, which causes a reaction of blood splurting from the male anatomy. I'm trying to keep this as PG as I can. The scene can be likened to a somewhat similar scene in the 2009 film Antichrist, Willem Dafoe's character, who also remains nameless, he's only ever referred to as he, and his wife is only ever referred to as she. The only person that actually had a name in that film was the child who passed. And the film is really dealing with this couple, dealing with that loss of identity of they're no longer parents, their kid has passed, what happens now? They do so through very extreme means, but the symbolism still stands. We are seeing a very specific part of the anatomy that we use to define between male or female, exerting this fluid that we all have to survive. Both Flowers and Lung 2 also focus heavily on finding skeletal remains, normally in pools of blood. Again, blood, we all have it, we all need it, that's part of living and being a human. The same goes for skeletons. While we are comprised heavily of water and fluids, we need this rigid structure to keep us going and keep us moving. Both also focused heavily on TVs. TVs either being destroyed or coming on inadvertently or showing static. Easy for people to lose themselves in an identity that they either want or in escapism. With the TVs coming on, normally there is somebody in front of them. It's easy to wrap yourself so up in this fantasy world or these things that we watch that you kind of lose connection with what's really going on in your life and what's really going on with the world around you. Even watching the news, things are so polarized and to such extremes, it's hard to tell if there's any reality there or if it's just the way they're editing, the way they're writing, the way they're talking, the images they're showing. All of these things can factor in and totally sway people's opinions. Not to mention the obvious focal point of this entire argument of loss of identity, social media, where people get so wrapped up in portraying a particular character that they go to such extremes that some of them end up dead, just to push this online persona further to gain more attention from more people that they probably don't know and will never meet. Normally in the process completely losing what made them them. And this is exactly what we're seeing in Lung 2 and Flowers. Of these people became victims, they became dead bodies just rotting. Rather extreme origin point for this journey of them deciding what they are now, what they have become. In the case of Flowers, it's, am I the thing that happened to me? Am I the murder that happened to me? Or am I still who I was before? In Lung 2, it's the guy from the beginning trying to find out who he is and what is going on. And why is he so isolated away from everybody else? Because both of these films also have a heavy sense of isolation, which would come with a loss of identity and a loss of who you are, and this need to be isolationist because you can't either let people see the real you, or there's no point because they're never going to see past this thing. Time again for a YouTube channel spotlight. This is probably the biggest channel I've covered. It's Creepy News. Channels like this are a big part of the reason why Keep YouTube Creepy is so important. This is very real world things that are happening and things that people need to be aware of, but they do have a darker lean because unfortunately the world isn't perfect, life isn't perfect. So Creepy News looks at these things, talks about them, reacts to them, and tries to make people aware of some of the not so great things that are going on around people. Not to mention, this channel does a wonderful job of talking about what happened in a very sensitive and respectful tone, and it never feels exploitative. It feels like these were real people and we are going to talk about what really happened and not just there for shock value. So if you haven't already, go check out Creepy News. It's a fantastic channel. Give them a subscription, comment, tell them I sent you. Thank you. And I hope you enjoy. This concludes our look at Lung 2 and Flowers from Phil Stevens. If you like what you're hearing, please hit like, comment, subscribe. If you don't like what you're hearing, please drop a comment and let me know. Thank you.